Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you guys here. Always nice to talk to the guys that's really interested in the dairy. We hope we see you in future in the field. All right, today we're going to look a little bit at udder health and the milking machine more intense than that we did in class. There will be some things that we've done in class just to get you going, and then we'll go more into detail and also look at some practical applications. What we need to appreciate is that we don't sit with the same cow that we had in the 60s. If you look at that picture, what it tells you is that cow was more bred for meat. It didn't produce the volume of milk that our cows are capable of these days. And because we have basically genetically altered the super cows, we sit with a problem that we self-created. We have to look after those animals much better, whether it's nutrition-wise, whether it's management-wise. If we start looking at the immune system of the cow, you know already that the most important part of the immune system is the teat canal. I'm just going to try and put it on presented mode. If we look at the teat canal, you know that it's the bottom of the teat. The sphincters play a major role. The elastic fibers there, once they're damaged, they can't close anymore. And then above that, we've got a teat cavity and the udder cavity that we'll come back to their purpose later. Here's a photo, electron microscope photo of the teat canal. You can see that's about, it's usually from 6 to 8 millimeters long, even a little bit longer. But inside there, we've got the epithelial tissue that is secreting the keratin. And on its top, the inner side, is the Furstenberg ribs that also helps a bit. The keratin is always secreted into the teat canal. During milking, during lactation, this is washed out. You know, it captures the bacteria. When we start milking, that is washed out. And during the dry period, it actually forms that plaque that prevents bacteria from coming into the udder. Now, if we start looking at the role of the machine, the vacuum level of the machine plays an enormous role in whether or not the teeth are damaged. And that is the elastic muscles, the part of the teeth that can be damaged or not. Once that is damaged, if you look at the photo, the 3 and the 4, the top two, it cannot close properly anymore. And a part of the very, very important immune system is just gone. It can't be.
Inge, can I check with you?
Yes.
It seems like which slide are you on right now?
I'm showing the teat canal. Is it not?
Is it the immune system of the other slide with the 3 photographs?
Okay, is it now back?
Yes, I just want to know which slide, because we're wondering if your slides are advancing or not.
I'm using the effect of the vacuum level.
Yes, you are there.
Okay.
So let's check if it moves ahead as you speak.
All right, I'll rather stay on this mode then.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. If we look at the rest of the immune system, we said the teat canal is the first line. The second line is our the cellular immune system. We know that the cells are not really present in the udder normally, and they have to be recruited. If there's a problem, like you can see, macrophages identify the pathogens, cytokines is excreted, it goes into the blood, and it actually gets the polymorpholeukocytes to come into the udder. Because of this process, there's always a little bit of delay if you've got an intramammary infection. And during this delay period, you can have multiplication of these bacteria. And that is one of the drawbacks, basically, of the immune system, the cellular immune system of the udder. The second thing, if we look at the polymorpholeukocytes, if you look at the photo on top, You can see that is what it looks like when it's in the blood. And you can see all those tentacles and things makes it much more effective in identifying and killing and sorting out the bacteria that's in the blood. The moment it actually enters into the milk, it looks like the photo at the bottom. They are not as effective as in the blood because they've got both an energy shortage and an oxygen shortage coming from the blood into the milk. The pH is different, and they also, because in the blood we don't have fat globules, which is present in the milk. That is foreign, and they would, the macrophages would engulf these foreign fat cells and then not be able to basically attack the bacteria that's there. Now, if you look at the polymorpholeucocytes, there's about 200 billion circulating in the body of the animal, of which most of them are adult. Now, to maturity, they take about 2 weeks, and they live in the blood for 1 to 2 days. But once they enter the udder, they live for a very short period of time. So in case of bone marrow depression, which we see in high yielding cows when they're in a negative energy balance, these formation of the polymorphocytes is also suppressed. The other problem that we from time to time have with udder health is if you've got a chronic infection, there is a constant need for new white blood cells, and it becomes up to a point where the body can't supply it fast enough, and you get immature white blood cells circulating, which is not as effective in basically getting to the place. So your time to the infection takes longer, and they're much less effective once they are at the site. Now, if we look at the milking machine, what is the purpose of the milking machine really? If you look at that photo on the top, that was the very first milking machine that came to South Africa. You could milk 2 cows with it. That that thing is second from the left. You basically had to turn it around and around to develop vacuum. The vacuum reserve tank is that ball on the right of it. And then you could basically milk 2 cows. And we've come from there to where we are at the moment. But what a milking machine should do really, it should harvest fast and effective without causing teat or other damage, without causing cow discomfort or loss in both milk quality and quantity. And we will be looking at most of these things in the rest of the talk. Now, if we're going to evaluate the milking machine, the first thing we need to look at is the installation. Now, you guys might think, man, somebody installed the machine that they know what they're doing. There shouldn't be problems with that. That is unfortunately not so. If you look, for instance, at this photo, this was a milking machine installation. It was in Zambia, that they had major problems with high plate count and cell count. When I was there, they were installing new geysers. They tried everything possible to try and get the plate count down. And if you look at this installation, there where the red arrow is pointing at, the bottom line is the milk line. Excuse me. The top line, the stainless steel pipe to which it goes, is your wash line. Now, if you look at the connection between the two, it is just a very small diameter rubber pipe, the rubber line. Now, the reason why they couldn't get that machine cleaned is not because of lack of disinfectant, lack of hot water, any of those things. It is just the volume of water that could run between the pipes were much too little. When they fixed this, the whole problem was solved. On the other hand, if we look at the installation of the machine, the height of the milk line is important. Remember, at the end of the day, when we're going to milk, the vacuum that a cow feels, whether it's a high line or a low line, must be the same. But if something goes wrong, for instance, there's no milk flow, if you've got a low line with a lower vacuum, because you don't need to lift the milk so high, the damage that can be done is much less. On the other hand, if you've got a high line, some of them are at 52 plus kPa, the damage that can be done is much higher. We also look, the second point there is the flow meter. The flow meter is installed to control the flow, and usually your automatic cluster removers works on them. If they are installed far away from the cow or at a higher level than the udder, their reaction time is much slower, and this can affect your takeoff. Filter line, that is the line that actually needs to filter the air before it goes into your system. And I can tell you, I still encounter a lot of farms where there's not a filter line, where then we have problems with the 2x2 system. Is there sufficient reserve capacity? That's something I see these days often on farms. Their dairies has grown, their machines are getting a bit older, and there is not sufficient reserve capacity. If we move then on, the second thing is in maintenance, and this is a very important thing. We think as veterinarians that the farmers or the milking machine guys must do all the maintenance, and that is not correct. The farmer think the same, and that is why often they don't do what is supposed to be done. It is very important on a daily basis to make sure the pulsators are clean. The vacuum control valve, depending on which system they are, is clean. The rubber parts is not deteriorating, and your teat liners are replaced within the correct time. This is very important. It is so important to keep the vacuum or the air that goes into the pulsators correct. If you see here, this is a photo from American milking parlor, where they actually installed the lines at the bottom where the filters are kept there in a dust-free area, just to keep them clean, just to make sure that we don't have that problems. If you look then at operators, operation that is using it, we've gone over that in class, but your attachment of the liners, that liner is actually the cluster and the liner are in alignment and not twist on the teat. How is it detached? Are you using automatic cluster removers? What's your setting there? And then post milking management, what do you do with that cluster? Do you clean it? How do you approach it? Cluster performance, the weight distribution. These days they are putting more of the weight on the shells. As you can see in the bottom one, you can see the problem the guy's got here with, it's mainly Jersey cows. How we get the cow to stand on that, only he knows, but you can see the problem with cows with low udders. The cluster is lying on the floor, then instead of hanging on the udder, it is pressing into the teats at the base, and we can have problems with base lesions. Something like, for instance, if the air bleed hole is not open. In the top photo, you can see the milk is not moving away or moving much too slow away from the cluster piece. We also get it with installation where the cluster is too small. Then it can't handle the volume of air, especially in high producing animals. And you can see in the photo at the bottom what can happen with the overmilking, where in this case the whole teat skin was damaged at the apex of the teat. Overmilking, that would be in the beginning when we attach too fast before there is a proper milk let down. It can be during milking when our settings of the machine is incorrect, or it can be at the end of milking where most of the time the problem is. And the way we identify it, if you look at the bottom photo, that you sometimes don't see. If you ever palpate the udder and you, just when the unit comes off, put your, touch with your finger, you can feel the little bit of edema there at the problem where that, at the base of the teeth, where the arrow is pointing at. When it's more intense, you can see a ring there. So whenever you see a ring when the unit comes off, it's a problem. The photo at the top, what you can see there is basically a cow that's been over milked for 1.5 minutes only. It was a high milk line at 50 kPa. She was slaughtered immediately afterwards, and you can see inside, basically where the base of the teat is, the petechial hemorrhages, how that little veins burst, because there was no massaging going back. The blood couldn't flow back to the udder. All right, is this maybe a case of severe overmilking? If we look at measurements now, how do we determine overmilking? Now, I can tell you in the past, the only measurement we really had, there is no ISO standards that tells us exactly at which point the milking machine must come off. The milking machine designers basically tried their best to identify a correct point, but what we had to do is basically look at the volume of milk that was left in the udder when the unit come off. And we know that a lot of other things can affect it. For instance, a stressed cow that has adrenaline, the let-down reflex won't work well, and when the unit comes off, there can be a lot more milk. These days, however, we've got now apparatus that we can measure it with. Now, if you look at the claw piece, where the red and the blue arrow is, there is where we put the unit. It's like a little, almost like a needle that you put through in the mouthpiece at the red one, and at the short milk tube at the blue arrow. And if you look at the graph, then the red is indicating what we see in the short milk tube, and that is going up and down because that vacuum is obviously connected to your pipe. At the bottom, you can see a black and a blue graph. The blue part is indicating once it starts milking, it goes down lower. The moment it stops milking, you can see towards the right, where the vacuum becomes closer to your short milk tube is basically where the front teats are finished milking. And if you follow the black part, you can see that is a little while later when the back teats are finished. So by using this apparatus very carefully, we can actually determine now where the cutoff point is. One of the students, Peter Vermaak, did a trial on this. And we determined by changing the place where the automatic cluster removers are taking off, that is increasing the volume, making it earlier, we could actually shorten the overmilking duration by 29%, which is quite a lot. And during that time that it was overmilking, the vacuum was also lower. That had a big difference on the potential damage to the teat. Now, if we look at the liners, that plays a much bigger role than we thought in the past. If we look here, vacuum at the teat end, or the claw vacuum, what they also call it, has got a huge influence on congestion. Now, if you look at this, what this graph indicates, at 0, it is where the cluster comes off, and you can see the time where the teat is actually congested. At a low vacuum, the green one, it takes about, what would it be, about 10, 12 minutes before it's back to normal, and it should be a little bit below normal because the let-down reflex engorged the teat a little bit. You can see at 50 kPa, where the level of congestion, almost 30%. 5% is acceptable, not more than that. And the duration, even after 30 minutes, that congestion has not returned to normal. This is a huge problem and a contribution to teat canal damage. So if we look at the liners, just a little bit looking at the liner itself, the top is the liner part that goes into the shell. The right on top is your mouthpiece, followed then by the barrel. Now, if we are going to determine the size of the liner, we always measure it from the top, 75 millimeters below the mouthpiece. There in the barrel, we determine what the width is. And once we determine in a herd what the average liner size is, that teat liner should be 1 to 2 millimeters less. So it should really fit snugly around the teat itself. If we've got liners that's too wide, what will happen during milking? Instead of the teat stretching downwards, it will stretch to the side, so become shorter, and the massaging action would be less effective. Now, once we go to a herd, we can actually go and determine the size, the teat size in the herd. These days, if you go down to especially Eastern Cape, they've got mixed breeds. Some farmers has got both Jerseys and Holsteins. So it's very, very difficult to determine the actual size. But by going through the herd, and you can see this little apparatus where you can measure the width. It is around about the middle of the teat, and the height. You can determine about in 10% if you take off all the animal groups. You can put it in an Excel sheet, and it will determine for you what the average size in that herd is. Here you can see it's about the length of the teats is about 5 centimeters if you look at the graph, and it's about 25 millimeters and about 25 millimeters wide. So the liner we will select will be around about 23.5 millimeters for that herd would be the most effective one. Now, if we move down to the mouthpiece chamber, if you look at that photo, you can see that presents teats. The purple one is a very, very short teat, going down to the red, very long teat. If we look at that, the ideal vacuum that we want at the mouthpiece, that's on top, is about 10 kPa while we're milking. If this increases, there will not be good attachment of the teat. There will not be good massage of the teat. This can be a problem. So when this mouthpiece is shallow, in other words, when it bites quickly into the teat to hold onto it, we will have a lower vacuum here. If it is deeper, in other words, a bigger one, this will be very difficult to milk short teats with, and the compression can be affected. So very important not just to look at the barrel, but also the length of the mouthpiece. The other thing about the mouthpiece is the top, the seal. In other words, if you put your finger in that area, that round area you feel there, it needs to seal snugly. But if it's very stiff, it can damage or suppress much more into the tissue there and prevent the blood from getting back to the body. If it's too flexible on the other side, it can cause problems with leaking. Now, the next thing is, how does that liner compress? If we look at the top table, the first thing that affects liner compression would be the shape of the teat. If you've got big teats, in other words, round at the bottom or round at the bottom, or they're congested, there will be more compression from the liners onto that teats. Very short teats will have much less compression, and very, very long teats where the liner can't close below them will also have low compression. The other thing that will affect this compression is obviously the vacuum in the claw, because it's the difference between the pulsator chamber and the vacuum underneath the teat that causes the action. Your liner itself, how you mount it, if it's very stiff, the compression will be harder. If the wall is thick up to a point, it will be more compression. But if that liner rubber is too hard, it will not compress as good. Now, if we look at the compression, it is basically, we've talked about the ABCD phase, the closing and the opening. So if you look at the bottom picture, it starts off with the A phase going into the B phase where it's open, and then the C phase going down. Now, that is the area where the liner actually moves. It opens on the A face side and it closes on the C face side. Now, it starts to close, and you can see where the touch point is indicating. Here, it only touches the teeth and folds around it. Then it places a little bit of compression on the teat, and in that yellow area, you can see with that little bit of compression, it actually is enough to stop the milk from flowing. Now, the moment the milk is flowed or stop flowing, we get additional pressure, and this is called overpressure. Now, the level of the overpressure is important. If you look at this graph here, basically it shows your overpressure should be around about 8 to 12 kPa. If it's too much, we're going to damage the teat canal, the teat opening. If it's too little, we don't massage the teat enough during the D phase and we will get congestion. So that's important for every liner to have the correct overflow pressure. Still on the liner, if we look at different liners are made for different purposes. If you look here, these are two lila liners. If you look at the graph, the green one, at the bottom is the length of the teeth. So you can see the green one was developed for teeth that are quite short. So if we look at the pressure there, it is quite good up to a point. If your teeth is over 5 centimeters long, you can see the compression is going down. The more pinkish one, you can see it's developed for longer teeth. So with short teeth, it will give no compression. You basically cannot milk the shorter teeth. So important to take that into consideration when selecting. We also now get liners with different shapes. In South Africa, we mainly still use the round one. You can see there at the top. When it closes, there's quite a lot of stress on that area where it closes. And once it closed once, it will always close on the same place. We do have, I've just written there for you, if you milk a cow for 5 minutes, that liner collapses 300 times. So you can imagine that wear and tear will work on this liner. It cannot be used longer than it should. The other one we see in South Africa is the triangular liner. There's been research done on it. Some of them states what I stated here, that it doesn't really preserve the teat canal better. It hasn't been proven yet, but research is still ongoing. The other liner we also have in South Africa is the vented one. You can see there in the mouthpiece, the opening is there instead of in the claw at the bottom. Now the idea is getting in the air there and helping the milk to transport away from the teat into the cluster, that you get less milk from the one quarter going to the other in the case that you've got liner slip. Now, if you look at the two graphs, the one is indicating the vacuum at peak milk flow. The other is indicating vacuum at low flow. If you look at the red and the green line, that will indicate the vacuum in the mouthpiece. The red line is when you don't have that vented opening. And the green line, you can see it moves up and down, the vented one in the high flow. In the low flow, your vented liners vacuum almost follow the same pattern as the pulsograph. Overuse liners has got a lot of problems. In other words, liners is used for longer than the time. Hello, can you guys hear me? All right, I'll carry on. I hear some noise in the background. But overuse liners has got a lot of problems. The first of the milk flow will be lower. Because of that, you will milk for longer. There will be more increased stripping, so more milk left, and the yield will also be less. Poor massage and the defense mechanism will be affected. So just not worthwhile not to replace liners at the correct time. There's basically four things influencing the liner. It is, yes, what we've talked about now, the wear and tear of the movement. The fat, especially in our rubber liners, can enter into that rubber and eventually we can't get it out. Any detergent or heat, so if you wash at very high temperatures, that can damage. And UV light, ozone, also has got an effect of that. So careful where the farmer actually stores things. Now, if we come to congestion in the teat, it's really because of if you overmilk and how long do you do it. We saw that already in the graph. The vacuum that's incorrect, a liner that doesn't fit, or the liner design that's incorrect. So how do we see it? If you look then at the cow, this is your short-term changes. The color can change. You sometimes see that the teat becomes blue, the swelling at the base or the end. The openness is how open the teat opening is. And your vascular drainage, obviously, is then the swelling part. If this carries on, you see the long term where the teat end becomes damaged. And eventually, you can also see lesions if there is chemical problems. Now, what will we do? Or the farmer will first come to you and he will tell you there's a change in the milk yield. They lower, usually the complaint is they milk longer. If you do the testing, you will find the teat in vacuum might be incorrect and the mouth piece vacuum might be incorrect. If you palpate in the dairy, you'll find the congestion, you'll find the hyperkeratosis, and obviously then what will follow is your somatic cell count will increase. I'm not going to spend a long time on this. We've been over this in class, but this is just showing the way that the machine is working, and you can actually test it. I just put this in because in the last exam we had, all of you missed this one part. You're very good in picking up now the within claw change, which you can see a lot of them is in here, especially in Unit 2. You're good now in identifying where it's outside the ISO standards, but this is a real case. If you look at the vacuum here, the vacuum at 0.1 should actually be exactly the same as the vacuum at 0.4. The problem in this stereo was the reserve capacity of the machine was going, and the guy had to put the vacuum up very high. You can see in the first one, it was way above what it was in the fourth one, and the 10th one, it was around about 28. So you, by looking at that, I could identify that this was a severe case of insufficient vacuum. By looking at the graphs, you know by now your D phase, very important for the preventing congestion. When your B phase, that is right top, is too short, we will also increase our milking time. And on the right bottom one, you could see that one of the liners, there was actually a split in the liner and it wasn't pulsating at all. Now we've gone over all these things, we've got background information, but what you must never forget to do is ask the farmer what is important for him. Because you need, he will be your client in the future. If his first ideas is maybe not the correct ideas, in time you try and change it, you try and motivate him to do the right thing. But first ask him, what does he want? Is milking speed important? If you go to our largest dairy in South Africa, they're milking at the moment 5,000 cows. They've got 3 dairies where they do it in, but it's on the same farm. So surely that guy needs speed. We've got a lot of dairies milking over 1,000 cows these days. Is it rather important for him that the teat condition is preserved and his somatic cell count go low? It might be a farmer, comes to mind, there's a farmer building up his herd and he doesn't want to buy in new animals. So he really wants to preserve what he's got. He wants the animals to stay 6, 7 lactations in the parlor. So for him, that would be very important. Or is it both of the above? And really, at the end of the day, it should be the latter. So what you must realize, if we're going to select liners, a liner that is designed for faster milking will milk less complete. A liner that's designed for less slipping will be less comfortable for the cow. So there's always something to take and something to give. So we need to find out what is the most important on the farm. With a liner map that is unfortunately not really available, we can help a lot to assist in the correct setting. Here, the teat end vacuum is important and the bee face length, so the time that it is full milking, very important. And this is for this specific liner. Now we can look at the speed in the green areas because that is what supposedly won't damage the teat. And you can see the fastest we can milk here is 89%. But if we milk at 89%, look where the vacuum is on the left-hand side. It's 46 kPa, which is way in the danger line. So if something goes wrong, we can have a lot of damage. Even at the 88 and 85, at the 42 level, we're still playing on with fire. So if we go to 39 kPa, we can see if we make the bee phase 450 milliseconds, that could be a very good selection for this herd. It can still milk relatively fast, but be much safer, not causing teat canal damage. Now, I want to give you a little bit of information on South Africa. Now, if we first look at the left side, what is the bovine udder health in South Africa? Now, I must tell you, I do not know. I know what I see in the veld, but I cannot give you a summary. A few years ago, the IDF asked us to give us a summary of what's going on in the udder health in South Africa. We do not have that information. The bulk tanks are tested by the milk buyers. They have that information, but they are very reluctant to share that. So we don't have it in one pool to check. If you look then in the middle on top, National Milk Recording, which is such an excellent scheme, which tests for basically looking at all three pillars that the milking, basically that dairy is based on reproduction, your nutrition, and udder health. And they test on a regular basis, which gives you the trends. Only if you look at that, 15.5% of South African herds are participating here, which is such a shame. If you look then at our advanced management systems, this is data I got 2 months ago, 3 months ago. At the moment, with those two systems, there's about 660 of there's maybe just 1,000 commercial farmers left, if that many. So between 60 and 70% of our farmers are using that. We as vets, if you plan to go into the dairy business, you need to learn how to use that, because even though the farmers has got these fantastic systems, they do not utilize it. I'm just going to give you one or two basic examples. This again, a farm I was on not very long ago, April this year. The farmer is milking 3 times a day. Excuse me, they've got a little bit of problems with reserve capacity. It's a large herd. And when we looked at this data of his, it shows you basically whether the units are attached more than once, whether it is detached, whether the cows kick it off, just the basic information. When I looked at the data, the evening milking where there was no supervision, out of the over 1,200 cows that he was milking, there were 600, almost half of them, that had to be reattached. And he didn't look at that, he didn't see it. And the reason for that was the time from touch, in other words, where they prepared the cow to attach, was not adhered to at night. So by the time they attached the unit, there was no milk flow. And because the vacuum was really, really dicey, it wouldn't hold. But what was so sad to me is that this information is available to the farmer, but they're not looking at it. A graph I very, very often use is the milking curve. It shows you here basically the milk flow of the whole milking. You can see that pink area is, say, for instance, the morning milking. You could see if we look at the 0 to 15 seconds, that is a little bit low. Do you see it's 0.2, where it can be up to 0.5. And if you look at the graph, you see it doesn't go up straight. It first dawdles a little bit before it goes up. So that can show us that the stimulation or the time from touch to attachment is too short and the stimulation not sufficient. What is very nice in the Del Pro, it gives you for every group of animals a different one. And sometimes the overall graph that we can see here looks okay, but if you look at individual groups, you can see that there's problems. Now, what it indicates, if you basically look, it's about 800 milliliters of milk. Once the milk flow becomes below that, there's a challenge to udder health. So we can see in the beginning is a short period, and at the end, it might be a very long period. So in this herd, we definitely have to look at the takeoff time and a little bit at the preparation. Remember, we looked right in the beginning at the basically at the figures showing you the teat cistern and the udder cistern. Now that very first production of milk in this graph is basically only the milk that is present when you start milking the cow in the teat cistern and the udder cistern. And because there wasn't a let down reflex, you can see the milk flow drops and it only afterwards go up when the stimulation is there. In other words, the bimodal phase. In certain areas, this is a major problem because they don't adhere to stimulation. And in this period of time, a big potential for udder damage. Now, in this last few minutes we've got, let's just look at a practical example. A farmer calls you. Now, this can be a typical thing. We've got huge problems for many months. He's got a problem. But being as it may, his cell count is high, he thinks his hygiene, everything is fine, but still he can't get the somatic cell count out. Now, what do you do? It is very nice if you start on the farm and you've got certain criteria. Yes, just very basic criteria for you to start off with, because we need to identify where the problem is before we can solve it. Now, first of all, a very good thing to look at is just the number of clinical cases, and there you can see the goals. The bulk somatic cell count. We can see the goals here, and you can look then at trends over time. What has happened here? Okay, you can see this guy is at 400,000 and for a long period of time. So it won't be something that happened overnight. And you can also see at the culls that he culls because of mastitis. In the lactating cows, we can ask ourselves also a few questions. You look at the percentage of new intramammary infections, so it will give you the indication of the risk. If you look at the new intramammary infections, and the best way you can do it really is by having herd samples, individual bacterial of the animals. And many of our South African farms, we take on a regular basis whole herd samples, in other words, of each cow. Your goal is to have less than 8%. And you can see in a herd, if it goes above 12%, we might run into trouble. The next one is you look at your somatic cell count of your first lactating animals. 90% of them should have a cell count below 200,000. If we look at the individual cell count for cure, you should have a cure rate of above 40%. If that is not so, we need to go and look. There might be a lot of chronic cases. We might have a very severe infection, the bacteria we've got in that herd. During the dry period, there's also two criteria that's very handy for us. We look at the risk of cure, and the risk of new infections. So in other words, with what somatic cell count or preferably bacteria did the cow dry up, and with what did she calve down. So this is a bit of a shocker to a farmer. This is also a real case, a guy milking 400 cows. If we look at the quarter milk somatic cell count, we can estimate what the daily loss is based on the somatic cell count. Now, in the table, it's just depending on what the somatic cell count is. If it's between 125 to 250, it's got a 5.9% loss. 100% loss, for instance, there at the bottom will be one of the quarters that's inactivated. Now, we calculated on this farm, a farmer, you can see, very good farmer, high producing, 40 kilograms of milk a day. With that, one would expect not a lot of problems if the animals can produce that high. But look what the daily loss was on that farm, 5,500 Rand. Per month, it worked out 186,000, and per annum, over 2 million. Now, the thing is, we cannot make that zero by welcoming the farmer, but we can cut a lot on that. And basically, what I want to tell you guys, you are really, really needed in practice. The farmers these days cannot make mistakes anymore. A small mistake like this, and one would say this is a good farmer, can cost him so much money. So by regularly being involved and really in the udder health, not just doing PDs, nothing wrong with that, but you have to go further. You need to look at the udder health because 80% is subclinical damage, subclinical loss. The farmer is not aware of it, and that is why not a lot is done on that. And if the guy don't come right, maybe he can do this. Okay, thanks, guys. Let me close. Are there any questions?
Yes, there is, Inge-Marie. Luke Bauer asks, where would we be able to get the measuring device to measure teat width and length?
That's a little bit of a difficult thing. I got that De Laval is actually making them, but they're not available in South Africa. I have asked the De Laval company already to provide us with some. I think, however, if we do struggle to get hold of the device, it's a very simple thing that can be manufactured by somebody. It's just a plastic that's bent round with a scale on. But one can still try and ask De Laval. I got it in, I think, Copenhagen at a conference, but they were the providers.
I have a question. How do we deal with the variation of teat anatomy within a herd? And also, for example, where the parlor is used to milk both Jerseys and Holsteins.
Yeah, that remains a problem, Martin. You know, they are hurt. I know, I can think of one specific one where he's got a purebred Jersey and a purebred Holstein. What we've done in that case is really just try and go for the average, which is not the best, because your Jerseys is still struggling with, you know, the smaller teats. The problem that I've seen this year in many of the herds that I visited was actually a problem both in Jerseys and Holsteins of teats that's becoming shorter again. And the moment we go below 3 centimeters teat, it virtually doesn't matter which liner we use. A lot of that herds had to go over to the low mouthpiece liners. But it remains a thing. We try and get those farmers genetically to improve, but we can't solve that problem totally.
Are there any other questions? Luke says, thank you. And here's a question from Sureta. Let me just open it up all the way. She just wanted to confirm what Prof said, that they work on it on a daily basis. We think the farmer knows and the farmer believes that when the milking machine was serviced, it is good to go, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I can agree
Can I-
100%. Yeah.
Can I ask Inge-Marie, the relationship between farmers and veterinarians with specialties such as yours and with the companies that service these machines, that can sometimes be quite delicate. Am I right?
You put it quite eloquent. Not to break down at all. We've got good people out in the field, also servicing milking machines. I think the problem we have in South Africa, we've got too few people. They are overworked and really very often. And I must talk now about historic. When I started off in South Africa, I crossed a lot of swords with these people because at that stage, nobody else was testing machines but them. And one of the problems that I have experienced, and that is actually sad, is that these people that fixes the machine, that test the machine, once they tested it, they cannot analyze it. They do the test, they give to the farmer, but they cannot analyze it. And these are people from areas where there's huge milk production. I think what one should do is take hands and really help educate these people and work together with them. And throughout the years that I've been working with them, I developed friendships with many of them. I learn from them, they learn a bit from me. And in that way, we both can serve the farmer and the animals much, much better. So I think one thing we should strive at is to work together. But on the one hand, if something is wrong, we need to be able to identify it. And that I see as the work of the vet. You as a veterinarian cannot take the screwdriver in your hand and go and fix something on the machine. We are not qualified to do that. But once you understand the machine, you can test it and say to the guy, look, this is not right. Please fix it. Once you've done, and that's what I always do, resend me the pulsograph, resend me the reports, or in a case, I would go and test the machine myself. But if you haven't got the apparatus, let them retest and send that to you and make a working relation between you, the farmer, and the milking machine guy.
Yes, I would add that in the USA, the situation is exactly the same. The companies cannot find technicians, and the technicians are having to run all over the place, actually taking care of emergencies and not necessarily preventive maintenance. And as one can see from your presentation, that the level of detail of knowledge is very intensive.
Yeah.
So that's why somebody like you is very valuable.
No, but thanks, Martin. But what we need is this guy sitting there today. We need you guys in this country really to start specializing. You need you guys really to start specializing on these automated systems. And Dr. Martin will be able to tell you also the valuable information you get from a nutrition point of view on a daily basis. We need really to make use of it. We need to motivate the farmers to use that. The milk recording, the valuable data that is available from the more we use it, I think the more the farmers will also appreciate the value of that. And as I said earlier on, they can just not afford to make mistakes these days. It costs so much money, and the margin, profit margins are not big. They have to go big to be able to survive. But for that, we need excellent veterinarians like you guys, hopefully will be then to be able to help the guys in future.
Right, we have another question here from Jacobus Paul. So for the Holstein and Jersey mixed herds, would one consider setting up the parlor in a ratio to the herd? By this, I mean having 30% smaller liners and 70% larger for the respective breeds. If the ratio is 30 to 70, Jersey to Holstein? Or would this cause too much trouble with managing and mixing milking groups?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I'm struggling a little bit with the question.
Yeah, the way I understand it is actually should you have different liners on your claw piece at the same time, and this is usually not a good idea because the cow is very sensitive when she's milking. For instance, if you've got one unit that's malfunctioning and she is milked with that at a lower or a different vacuum level than normally, she picks it up. So, when your Holsteins are going to come in and they are going to be milked with it, very small liners, they're going to have problems because the teat won't penetrate deep enough. On the other hand, your Jerseys with the big liners, if it doesn't slip, and that is what the problem is sometimes, that they have to up the teat in vacuum. Those teats are stretching to the side and they're less being massaged, especially if they're short, and that leads to edema. So at the moment, the best we can do still is rather cope for the average teat liner size. I hope that is answering the question.
Here follows another question from Luke again. Is it possible to use a herringbone parlor with one line for the Holsteins and one line for the Jerseys if you have a smaller parlor?
I think if you can keep them outside, that you can go the one side, the Holsteins, the other side, the Jerseys. If you can manage it, getting the animals in like that, you can do that because the liner is not going to change a lot on the vacuum. That can help. That can be an answer to the problem.
So a question from me related to the students. What would you say are the top 3 things that they might see in practice that are related to the milking machine and mastitis?
I didn't hear what, can you just repeat the question, Martin?
So my question is, what are the top 3 problem areas that you would see on a dairy? And this is for the students, the top 3 or the top 5 that you see most commonly.
I must say, if I look in time now, I used to have mostly problems with Staphylococcus aureus and then Agalactae. These days, the bacteria, they are still present, and we'll talk about the problems just now. But these days, I see more machine and problems that as in the parlor with preparation, but that has been all the time. Your touch to attachment, because this take time, this take effort. Remember, our dairy herds are huge these days. We have now got bigger herds than even New Zealand on average. The second thing is really maintenance of the machine, and I see these days a lot of vacuum problems, and I see a lot, maybe because I'm more aware of that, take-off settings that's incorrect. So with the machine, I would say the preparation that's inadequate or incorrect, then the settings of the machine or the maintenance, and then mainly your take-off settings and vacuum level that we struggle with.
Good, thank you very much. Are you ready for your next presentation?
Yes, let me just see if I can get it open.
If we have time after the second presentation, I would like you to spend 5 or 10 minutes just updating us on your takeoff work that you've been doing.
Oh, okay. Is this showing on the screen?
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you. What they ask me is environment, the role of the environment in udder health. And that is really a task that one cannot do in one presentation, because there's so many things playing a role in coming off the environment. The first thing, obviously, is the milking machine, but climate plays such a huge role. We know in South Africa, heat stress is a major problem because most of our country is not suitable in the summer months for cattle. That is why, or for dairy cattle, that is why we have to make sure that they've got shade, that we can cool them down in different parts of the world. And Dr. Martin can tell you much more about that. Is you have to be careful applying, for instance, teat dip, because the teats could freeze if it's a fluid. Housing circumstances differ so much, whether it's pastures, whether it's scams. That bottom photo is of cows in Switzerland. If you look carefully, you can see how steep it is there. When I was in Switzerland, I asked the people what is the main reason for losing animals, thinking it could be mastitis or nutritional or reproduction problems, but it was not. The main reason for losing animals at that stage was cows breaking their legs, because what happened in Switzerland is that they've got very, very little space. You can think the whole country is basically mountains. So there's not a lot of grass available. What they did now is they crossbreed their brown Swiss and their animals with more dairy cattle to get more milk, because they can't have more cows. But by doing that, these animals are not so well adapted to climbing. So every country's got their different problems. Bedding, nutritional factors can be environment stress, feed stress, just the way you present it. Is there enough feeding space? Genetics, they differ from animal to animal. We just talked a little bit about the teat size now. Hygiene, also the genetics, the hygiene is a major problem in our dairies, whether it's where the animals are kept, whether it's in the parlor, whether it's the operation in the parlor. Treatment can be an environmental problem. We know now about cases where animals has been treated for a long time with specific drugs on a farm, not prudently, where this bacteria is found in the environment and are very, very resistant. But what I decided to focus on here is really, let's look at the pathogenic bacteria. At least that is the area we can have a little bit, cover a little bit. Now, just the concept of udder health, if we look at the right-hand side, we want to make the duration of the intramammary infection in a cow as short as possible, because especially in your Agalacta and your aureus, but of the other two, the more and the longer they're shedding this bacteria, the more they contaminate the environment, whether it's the teat skin, whether it's the actual environment where they're lying down or living in. And the longer the infection, obviously, the more damage to the udder parenchyma that happens. So to try and prevent that, the earlier we can detect mastitis or infection, the better. The more effective we can treat the animals, the better. We've got these days vaccines available that we can use preventative if we know that is a problem in our herd. And if we really can't get rid of the problem and animal is excreting that bacteria and is a major source of infection, culling is definitely on the line. And also if she is not productive anymore, in other words, not bringing in her money. Transmission risk, we want to have that as low as possible. And that is a lot of the things we've been talking about. Milking procedure, we want to have as good as possible. Milking systems, we want to function. Biosecurity, and I again want to tell you guys, really, this is something in the milk industry that we have to up. At the moment, people buy animals without really checking them out. I'm not even talking about brucella and TB. There are so many diseases that can be spread by bringing animals in. The other thing is people movement on farms. Farmers has to be much more careful who they allow in their parlors, who they allow at their calves. Very important to be careful there. And then at the bottom, the risk of new infections, hygiene, all of those things that is very, very important. So if we look at the bacteria that's got the potential of causing mastitis, we've got the two major groups. But remember, anything we do here, if it is a host adapted, it does not say it cannot be come from the environment. We've got one or two exceptions. But what we say when we identified it as a host adapted or a contagious pathogen, that is the main way of transmission. Now, if we compare the two, the ones that's mainly host adapted is usually within the udder, the risk, and the environment is usually the risk is in the environment of the animal, where it lives in the parlor, hands of people, things like that. So most of the time, your host adapted one has got a longer intramammary infection, where something like, for instance, E. coli is usually a short-term infection. It's not adapted to live in the udder, and after a short while, it stops multiplying and dies off. This time variation varies also. Usually with your host adaptive ones, you've got initial very high cell count. In the environmental one, initially lower cell count. With your host adapted ones, and this is just the interesting point, when you start getting problems, say for instance with the aureus infection, in the beginning, before the clinical event, the cell count starts rising. So if you've got a very sensitive measurement, you can pick that up before the cow is going to be sick. Whereas in the environmental one, it's usually for clinical cases immediately high. So you can't pick it up or predict it based on somatic cell count beforehand. The prevalence increases because it's usually transmitted within the parlor as the days in milk continue. So late lactation, you'll have more of that in the herd, provided your dry cow management and treatment is effective. In the environmental one, they mainly a problem in the high risk period of the cow, and that would be postpartum in the negative energy balance stage. And the incidence in host adapted is related to the prevalence just because they long-term infections, which in the case of environmental infections is not so. Now again, just to sharpen you up again on the two, your host adapted ones is maybe your strep agalactae. I see at the moment we've got an outbreak again in the Free State of a herd with agalactae. They're much less in the past, but they're still there. Your aureus is mainly host adapted, mycoplasma. In South Africa, we place our head in the sand like an ostrich because identifying mycoplasma won't happen on your normal routine. We try by alternative ways identifying it, but I know only of one case where we isolated it from udder in South Africa. In certain American states, that's a major problem. The primary source here, as I said, is the udder itself. And with aureus in South Africa, we had huge problems with the human. I know now it's not only in South Africa, in different countries. There was a problem in Israel, for instance, with it. Other countries is now also experiencing, I think in the Netherlands, they have identified the same aureus from the udder and from a human source. And it's usually the milking machine or the hands of people that transmit this thing. Spread is normally during milking time. So the udder, the hands, the lead, teat liners, no communal cloths. It's basic things, but it's extremely important and very, very important for the farmers because a routine thing very often get a problem if we don't keep on watching it. On the other hand, environmental mastitis, your strep uberis, discalactae, your group gram-negatives, your E. coli, Klebsiella, a little bit Serratia. South Africa, I've seen Pseudomonas, very, very few cases. And then our non-aureus staphylococcus, or as it used to be known, Coagulose negative staphylococci. Mainly the environment and the environment where the animal is or how it's spread. Now, it is and it remains very important to distinguish between the different bacteria, because it is not just a question of mastitis, what do I treat the cow with? And I always am humbled by my last question I asked for my professor that actually gave us udder health. My last question to him was, what is the best treatment for a cow with mastitis? And that always reminded me how little I understood about this disease. It is not a disease that you treat effectively. Your treatment success is so low. It is the disease that you prevent. So in saying so, if we look at that graph, it is the somatic cell count. This is just this, it's logarithmics, and over days in milk, or over days since the infection, sorry. So if we look at the normal, it would be the one at the bottom. The somatic cell count should remain under 100,000. That is where it should be if an animal is normal, not infected and not irritated. If you look then at the second graph, that would be E. coli, the black one. Once an animal is infected with E. coli, and there's enough E. coli in there, you get a very sharp rise in the somatic cell count. You can see it goes up to, quite high. But within, if the animal survive, I must say that too, because remember, it can cause blue udder, it can kill the animal. If the animal survives, that cell count comes down, and within about 7 to 10 days, it can be back to normal. If, however, the third, which is the blue graph, infected with aureus, that is the norm, because aureus most of the time becomes chronic. It goes up to 600 or higher, and it remains there, and it can be there for life for the animal, up and down, up and down. With clinical cases from time to time. And then strep hubris, that is our new kid on the block. You can see the same story as with our aureus, but the problem is here, and this is also what we see in the country, the somatic cell count remains quite higher, so it can be in the millions. If we look at milk production, your milk loss for your different organisms, you can see E. coli, there is a very big dip in milk production, which remains there for a period, and it depends on the damage to the udder itself. With aureus, maybe a little bit less, but this can remain for life of the animal. And hubris, more or less the same as aureus, but over time, a little bit less severe damage to the udder. So let's start looking at the coliforms. The major three, as I said, in South Africa that we identify, and I'll give you the figures a little bit later, is the E. coli, the Klebsiella, and Serratia. Now, I do not really want to refer you to your notes, but there is a nice table there that gives you a little bit of a comparison between these three. Your E. coli is more your acute, peracute one that can give blue udder, that can kill the cow. And I'll show you just now a photo of one of our, unfortunately, proof blast animals, what she looked like. Your Klebsiella is infection that can be acute, but normally it is more of a chronic infection that can remain for a year or so in the udder. It has got a possibility to create blue udder, but I've never isolated it myself. And then Serratia is your more calm one. We can get clinical mastitis, but most of the time not. All it does is increase the somatic cell count, and it can remain in the udder for about 5-6 months. So it's more of a nuisance value, but irritating the udder. So in this case, the source can be the soil, the bedding, the grass, the manure, wherever the animal is, in the parlor, dirty liners, things like that. And the animals that are most at risk here is your, excuse me, your low somatic cell count animals. So that would be animals also under a lot of pressure. So if you've got E. coli problems, it will be an animal early lactation, and it will be the best of the best of the best cows. That cow that gives you the most milk is under most stress for this. So her immune system is suppressed. Once that E. coli managed to get through the teat canal, it can multiply very fast, and she cannot cope with that. Now, interesting thing here, 80 to 90% of infections can result into clinical mastitis, but it differs too. 8 to 10% of the coliforms usually forms, and that would be the rest of them, like Klebsiella, your enterobacterium. But over 80% definitely of your E. coli becomes acute. So important to distinguish between these bacteria. If we look at bacterial plate count, in other words, it just gives you indication how fast they multiply. So if they enter into the udder, and that is why we can sometimes see high producing cows being quite normal in the evening or in the morning. And if she comes in evening milk, this animal is severely, really sick. She can have endotoxic shock because this coliforms can multiply within 5 hours to absolute peak values. And neutrophil migration is then stimulated, but the big problem is once this bacteria is killed, the endotoxin is released, which can either cause necrosis of the tissue, or it can actually kill the cow if it's at high enough level. This has just been a survey that I looked at. You can see of the bacteria that are isolated, then with clinical mastitis from the dry period. In this case, E. coli was a major challenge. It must be a herd where they were on very wet conditions or inside where the bedding was not well maintained. This is just a photo to show you, this is a cow that actually survived. The 1/4, what you're looking at there, became necrotic. This is after about 3-4 weeks. That necrotic area just fell off, and with surgery, they removed the extra tissue there. But this is what E. coli can look like. If you guys come on practice, this cow still survives. She is at UP Proefplaas, obviously with 3 teats, but it's a very, very, very severe disease. As I said, Klebsiella, we don't have a lot of cases in South Africa, but it is more milk loss over a period of time that we see here. And these animals eventually is culled because of not such good performance. Now, in practice, what do we do? I looked here at a study that was done by Paolo Moroni. He's one of the lecturers at, no, I think this was at Wisconsin. Excuse for that background noise, it's our birds that's in the garden. But what they've done here is, and this is one of the things we'll do in practice, look at the hygiene score. So look at the cleanliness. In this case, I just showed you the legs of the animals, but they did a cleanliness score. And they looked then if the cleanliness score 1 is a good score, 2 is still satisfactory. But when the score went up to 3 and 4, you can see the percentage of Klebsiella in both farms increase. So there's a definite correlation between how clean the animal is, and that is obviously the risk of new infection. We do a udder hygiene score too. It's a very effective, very fast method to see what the camps or the bedding in certain camps are looking like when we need to clean them. And here again, the 2 different herds. Before cleaning, they actually had scores of 3 and 4. Cleaning the camps, you can see the percentage of Klebsiella in the herds. After they cleaned the camps, you can see the hygiene score came down, and so the Klebsiella. All right, if we start looking then at our streptococci, that mainly comes from the environment. Hubris, Discalactae has always been an in-between, because years ago it was more looked upon as a cow-to-cow transmission, but we know now it's more environmental. And basically, we've got 60% of them that is acute, and then 80% of the 18% is more of a chronic infection. And that is one of the things we, at the moment, actually researching. Now, what I want to show you is a bit of current South African data. Now, I'll start off just by looking at the major gram-positive bacteria. First of all, if you look at the top block, of the samples, these were around about, I think, 340,000 samples. It is comparing 2018 to 2015 period with 2018 to 20. You could see in the earlier period there was much more with bacteria. 74% of them actually didn't have bacteria that we isolate on the herd evaluations. That is now of individual cows. We take samples of all the cows in the herd and then identify them for microbiology and cytology. Now, if you look at the bottom, it also gives you the difference, first column of 2008 and the percentage, and then it gives you the numbers and the percentage of the current data. So if we look at aureus, Staphylococcus aureus, we can see actually compared with the earlier figures, 6% came down to 4.5%. The human one, that where the human were infecting, they came down quite significantly from 2.8% to virtually nothing. The aureus, the STI, is one that's increasing. I'm not going to say a lot about that, only that it's a different aureus reacting totally different than the one we know. In other words, it doesn't become chronic, it doesn't give high cell count, it doesn't cause a lot of other damage. And at the moment, it's a little bit tough for us to distinguish that from the other one. We can do it in our laboratory, but I don't think it's done all over the country. And in my opinion, a lot of animals might be slaughtered without reason. If we look at Agalactae, we can see it came down from 3% to 1.5%. Hubris is on the way up. It went up from 6% to 8%. And we'll talk a bit about that later. Discalactae, you can see it came down, but of all the samples we examined, about 17% of them had gram-positives of the major gram-positives. If we look then at the gram-negatives and the non-aureus staphylococci, if you look at the top table, you can, or just look at the summary at the box, the gram-negatives that we isolate is 0.4% out of all the samples. So you can see it's low, but it doesn't say we need to neglect it. E. coli, every time we isolate it, it can be a huge problem. So you can see gram-negatives, few of them, but problematic. And our big challenge at the moment, non-aureus staphylococci, you can see out of the bacteria we isolate, 76% is non-aureus staphylococci. So it is obvious then that we start looking closer at these organisms to try and learn more so that we can assist the farmers with answers. Now, the first thing we did was looking at the different strains, because in the past we only look at that as a group. We found in about 20 different herds that we examined that there were 3 major strains. That was Chronogenius, Epidermidis, and Hemolyticus. Other countries, we actually, for interest's sake, examined. We had a buffalo herd in South Africa, and they were basically all of them Staphylococcus simulans. So what we looked at here is the somatic cell count in those animals, and we saw that the one that gave the highest percentage of high somatic cell count was actually the Staphylococcus epidermidis. And the one we isolated the most, the chronogenius, actually over 1 million, there was only 50% of them. So it shows us there's a little bit of difference in strains, maybe in the somatic cell count level. We looked then at days in milk. Does it make a difference here? Basically, in all of those isolates, we found them mainly at the end of lactation, more of them there. We also looked at parity. We found that most of them was in first lactating cows, in other words, just after calving, and then in the older cows, if they're free lactations and more. Second and third lactation seem to cope better with them. Whether it's immune system of the animals, I'm not sure, but that is what we've seen in other publications overseas as well. Now, one of the things, and I hope it's pushed down your throat a lot these days, is antimicrobial resistance, because we really need to go into the field and use antibiotics prudently. If we do not do that, we will end up without antibiotics for use. I see this picture is a little bit unclear, but I'll explain to you what stands here. The first column is 2018, followed by 2019, 2020. And the first column gives you the different products. So ampicillin, that was done in South Africa, was in 2018 57% resistant, and it's now 68% resistant, this organism. So it's a huge problem. Penicillin went up from 55%, it's now 48%, but that's huge. Cloxacillin, ampicillin used to be in 2018 3%, it's now 27%. So I just want you guys to think about it. This is the organism we isolate most of the time. These are the antibiotics that is in most of our antimicrobial drugs that we use. Cefoxitin, your oxytetracyclines, there is still a 274%, but we have to be very, very careful. And then multi-drug resistance, luckily or thankfully, is just as 2%. But I cannot emphasize enough how carefully we have to be with antibiotic use. And that emphasizes also where if you go into the dairy business, you need to focus on being proactive, preventing that animals from getting it, and not just trying to treat the ones that's already got mastitis. The other problem that you saw is in hubris, in South Africa is hubris. Now, just to catch up again, remember we had 6.9% gram positives bacteria. Of these gram positives, 47% is actually hubris now, and it's more than aureus. So they are really, really increasing. And the problem with that is if you look at the cell count, and these are South African data, 80% of them had a cell count above 200,000. That is what we can call intramammary infection. But what is worrying is that 72% basically had cell count over 300,000, which we diagnose as mastitis. Subclinical, but it is mastitis. So a huge percentage of them is a problem. And I told you earlier on, they are inclined to become chronic. Now, if you look at this report, it first gives you the cow number. If there's any remarks, these are the dates of sampling that is in that first circle. So you can see this particular animal, 11170, had on 4 occasions, we isolated hubris from her, and in that next encircle area is her somatic cell count. You can see 2,3, 2,4, 3,9 or 8, 4,6 million cell count. And I just show you there, the one at the bottom of that page, that cow has a cell count of 17 million. Now, the problem for that for farmers, first of all, is it will push up the somatic cell count in the bulk tank. Maybe if he's got a huge herd, it will be diluted. But you can imagine a person milking 100 cows having only one cow with 17 million cell count. That will affect your bulk count. And for the farmer, it means money. And for the cow, it means probable damage to the udder and longevity that will be affected. Now, if we look here at the same type of resistance data that I showed you for non-aureus staphylococci, here we already started with your ampicillin, penicillin, cloxacillin going up. It's not as high as CNS, but we sit with 20%, 15%, 26%. And looking at 2018, it is just going up. But the one very, very serious problem we sit here with is multi-drug resistance. Already in 11% of cases, we saw that. Now, guys, why I'm so serious about this organism, many of our herds are pasture-based. Because of economic constraints, many of our farmers are starting to use either slurry on the pastures, which is an excellent fertilizer. But the problem is hubris is excreted in the manure, and some animals are permanent excretors for life. And by seeding this slurry over the grass, we are actually increasing the possibility of these animals being infected. And that is why hubris is one of the major topics that we're looking at the moment, to see how we can assist the farmers in future with that. Now let's go a little bit to the practical side. Now, unfortunately, I cannot animate this, but just again, a nice place to start off when you get to a farm. If you look at top in that green area, it again gives you some markers for new infections, for chronic infections, for infections in fresh animals, where it should be. So you can go and look at the data of the herd and first of all determine where is that herd. Is it on the top ones, in other words, within what we want, or is it not so okay? So if you go in a herd, the second thing you can do is look at the animals responsible for high somatic cell count. So is that less than 2% or is that not? If it is less than 2%, you follow the graph to the left-hand side. There it's basically then identifying those cows, separating that cows, treating them either in lactation or the dry period. If you can't get them cured, culling them, so separating them. That is the easy part of it. But I can tell you most of the time that is not so. So if more than 2% is causing the high somatic cell count, we go to this blue block that is actually in lactation. So we look first of all at the percentage new infections. If there is a lot of new infections, we should then look first of all which bacteria is causing it. Are we not dealing with a contagious organism? So then we can deal with that. Separating, like in the first one, treating, culling, making sure it doesn't come into the herd by security. The procedure in the parlor, we need to address very, very carefully then, that it doesn't spread from the one to the next. Milking equipment, we've been over a little bit of that morning. Purchase of animal, that is why biosecurity plays so much of a role. There was a time period where herds amalgamated that we had major agalacta outbreaks right throughout the country. Animals, if a farmer wants to buy cows, they should first be sampled, quarter milk sampled microbiology before he brings them on the farm to prevent at least a health outbreak. And then, yes, the other thing, need to look at the hygiene of the environment. The second thing he needs to do, if it's more of a chronic problem, then we have to identify the animals. We have to look at the treatment. Is that incorrect? Or remember, very often in udder health, when the farmer tell you this product just doesn't work, it might not be the problem of the product. If you palpate those udders, they might be fibrotic, they might be nodules, abscesses inside. The best of the best antibiotics cannot reach it, cannot kill those bacteria. So it's a question of severe udder damage at that stage, which we cannot cure. And then we can go to, if it's not a lot of new infections, not a lot of chronic infections, we need to go over to the last column, which would be the fresh cows. That area we need to then investigate what's going on in the dry period. First of all, to make sure they don't pick it up there, that our treatment or our prevention in the dry period is very sound. The area in which they kicked is very, very important. We are at the moment fairly lucky still in South Africa that the housing and so can be controlled relatively well. If you go overseas where the animals need to be housed, especially in Europe, a lot of time and work goes into the dealing and the cleaning of the bedding. So this is just a starting point for you if you get into to try and establish where the problem is. Because what do we want to do to be successful in udder health? We really want to avoid the disease. I've said it before, I'll say it as often if I can. It is a disease that you have to be proactive, not treatment success. So your management must be optimized and it must be maintained. Nutrition, so important, not just your protein, your energy, down to trace mineral level. Very important that that is correct. Remember these animals, I showed you right in the beginning, that cow being actually a super being that we manufactured over time. It's like an athlete running a race. For you and me, maybe if we've got running shoes and we run around the block and they don't fit very well or they're a little bit worn, it might not make a big problem. That animal is running the Comrades. Now, if you try and run the Comrades with basic tackies, you won't make it. And it's the same principle for those animals. Everything must just be right to try and help them. Vaccination. That is a new possibility that came to South Africa. Not for many years we've got vaccine, and I'll show you just now we've got a new guy on the block that can help us. So we need to identify whether it's really necessary in herd. We do not want to use it unnecessary, but it can be a great asset to help us get rid of certain of the problems. It's not a tool that we can use on its own, but together with good management, it can help really a lot. The health monitoring. So what I mean with that is not just saying I've got so many clinical mastitis cows. That is beyond repair. We already have the problem. We need to manage the health. And this is where this new systems where you have to take samples and monitor the microbiology that we can tell beforehand if things just start changing a little bit, that we can fix it before the problem is there. And we need to integrate different disease problems. So if you guys go out to the farm to do PDs, I know it takes up a lot of time, but you have to also schedule for a visit just for udder health to look at that. So the hygiene, how do we manage it? It's wherever the animal is. We need to look at hygiene. We need to look at the humidity. We need to look at overcrowding. You can have fantastic facilities, overcrowded, and this often happens when it's raining. The farmer tries and gets most of them animals indoor where they've got freestall barns, and then the same problem that's outside in the mud develop actually within the freestall barn. Ventilation, South Africa, not so much of a problem because our barns can be open. Overseas, it can be a huge problem because they have to close it for the cold. Pasture, how you manage the pasture, overstocking, overgrazing. shade, and this is something we just can't manage in South Africa on our pasture-based herds. Paddocks should be well drained. I've been on farms where they've got the parlour right down at the bottom where most of the mud is, where the animals are walking down there. Management around the troughs. Very often one sees around the troughs or around the eating space, very dirty, very muddy areas. And then a very important thing is that the cows can calve in clean area, because at that period they are the most vulnerable for new infections. And obviously the little calf is born without any immunity at all. So much more care should be given at these areas. In the milking routine, if we move to the parlour, that the udders that come into the parlour is clean, and how to deal with that. We've been over that in class. In challenging periods, to use pre-Tdip, but on clean teats. Basic things, the whole claw alignment, liner slip, all of that things must be identified, and when they are present in a herd, we need to deal with them immediately. And then, as we said this morning, the effective milking machine. Dry cow therapy and teat sealant. We've been over that in class, but here, very important, the dry period is the period that we can most effectively treat the cows. If we can identify all with intramammary infection shortly before drying up, we can only treat those animals. And if it's wet areas with internal teat seal, the others we can use internal teat seal, but very, very important to, when you introduce it, to do it hygienically. Otherwise, if you use the seal and you get bacteria inside, you might have a super infection developing, and that is caused by yourself. Sorry, I just want to go back there. Vaccinations. We've got at the moment 3 different vaccinations in South Africa for mastitis. The vaccine for mastitis, which is basically for Staphylococcus aureus, non-aureus Staphylococcus, your E. coli and your coliform. That's been used now in the country for quite a few years with big success where it is needed. So HETIS has also got a vaccine just with the J5 that we use for the coliforms and E. coli. And then the new one that actually hasn't been launched yet, but it's called UBAC. It is for strep uterus vaccine. And I was looking forward to it for quite a few years, because at the moment we're a bit with our hands in our hair with the uterus. And hopefully this is a vaccine that can help us. We shortly start with a trial in one of the herds, also to see how it's working in South Africa. As I said earlier on, uterus slurry is the main problem here. We can get it in TMR herds, which is on bedding, if the bedding is not well managed, because there's also manure. But what we found in herds that in the old days used, for instance, dry manure, when they put it in a heap, it heated up actually. And with the heating up, a lot of the bacteria is killed. But the problem these days is the farmers don't want to do it anymore, because then they lose nitrogen. And by not heating it up and preserving the nitrogen, we actually see more of the uterus on the pastures. This is not new to you, but I just want to emphasize it again. And because in environmental bacteria, it plays the major role. Most of your new infections, and remember, once you dry the cow off, they come from the environment, is just after drying off, when the pressure in the udder is very, very high. During mid-dry period, very low risk, but as the cow's udder is preparing for the next lactation, just prior to calving and then up to day 100 of lactation, a lot of possible new infections. So this is a photo I borrowed from Prof. Tina van Werden from Netherlands. They had to cut the antimicrobial use with 70%, 70%, within a period of 5 years. What they have done is basically, this is one of the things they followed. The dry cow is very, very important, was very important. They lowered the stress. They made sure the cow was in proper body condition score. The hygiene there now, I mean, for a guy in Netherlands that's milking 60 cows, that is cleaning the parlor himself, to have to clean the area where the animals are, the barn, where the animals are staying twice a day instead of once, takes a lot of doing. But that is what they had to do to increase the hygiene. Obviously, the hygiene in the parlor, they have to monitor other health, not clinical cases. So be proactive. And then the balance ratio. And this is, to you, it might be simple. To a farmer, if you show him that, it might be simple. But that is the success story, not the latest and the greatest. That is what we need to focus on. And just again, to say that trace minerals are so important. You know the effect of the selenium, the copper, and the zinc in the whole process of the trace minerals, getting the polyformal leukocytes into the place where they need it, and actually getting them to work, and then afterwards cleaning up the area that we don't have a lot of cell damage. So we sit with a lot of different strains. We have to look at the risk of new infection, the duration of the infection, the transmission. But I think, and hopefully you will appreciate, we need to know which bacteria is causing the problem in a herd, that we can deal first of all with the management. And then just the guys that slip through our fingers need to treat at the end. Thank you very much. This cow seemed to be very happy in her environment. I don't know where the photo was taken, but it is also comes from a photo in Europe, I think in Portugal. Thank you. If there are questions.
Thank you, Dr. Inge-Marie. We've got 3 questions so far concerning the SARS. The first one, with regards to a cow infected with the SARS, and if possible, if it's a lifelong infection, will she be a continuous carrier or spreader, or does the SARS flare up periodically and the dam will only then be infectious to the rest of the herd?
All right, Staph aureus is what we call an intermittent shedder. So in herds that's got Staph aureus, we have to sample them actually on a regular basis to identify the cow, because what happens is the bacteria basically gets a spot where it starts multiplying in the udder. It basically secretes a slime, which we call biofilm, that protects it. And it forms a whole colony there. And once this whole colony is at a certain size, it breaks open. And then it excretes all this aureus that's circulating in the udder. And in that stage, if it's enough of them that broke open, the farmer will experience a clinical mastitis in that cow. And if we sample her, we will pick it up. If the bacteria is still in the biofilm, we might miss it. But to answer the question is how we deal with the Staph aureus cows in a herd. Once we identify them, normally we take cow samples of the whole herd. Then we will take quarter milk samples of these Staph aureus cows. And there is a way we can see, basically get a prognosis, whether or not we might be able to cure or not. And things that we need to look at that cow is, first of all, her age. Your first and second lactation animals has got a much better chance to be cured. The immune system is better. There's not so much, most likely, damage in the udder. The next thing then we look at is how many of her quarters is infected with aureus. If there's 1 and 2, we've got a chance. If there's 3 or 4, the chances are very slim. We look then at which quarter it is, because your front quarters are treat better, I think basically just because they've got less milk. We also look at the stage of lactation. If that animal is early lactation, she doesn't cure very well because the immune suppression. If she's later in lactation, our chances are better to cure. And then there is one thing that's for me personally very important. Just after milking, I go and I palpate that udder. If I can palpate already hardness, fibrosis in that quarter, or lumps, because aureus forms an abscess, just like you see an abscess on the outside, it forms within the udder with a thick wall around it. If I can palpate an abscess or a hardening quarter, that cow will not be cured in that quarter. Now, all is not lost for us. Say, for instance, it's a very high producing cows, because remember, they are more prone because they are challenged with so much more and the immune system is suppressed. If it is only that one quarter, the others has not got aureus, this quarter's got aureus, is damaged, we can inactivate that quarter. In other words, in layman's term, we kill off that quarter that it doesn't produce milk anymore. And with that, we kill the bacteria. And very often your high producers can then, with 3 quarters, produce 40 liters plus and not be a threat. However, if she has got 2 or 3 of these chronic quarters, we milk her always last, wait for her, if she's in calf, to calf down, and then color as soon as possible when the farmer can get again a price for meat. But yes, she will shed intermittently right throughout the period that she's infected. The best to do once you identify her, the first thing is to put her last. And that group of animals, if at all possible, keep them in one group, manage them in one group. If they come into the parlor, don't even bring them into the parlor while you're milking the other animals, because what will happen is the milker will maybe put on the clusters, then go again to the other group of cows that hasn't got aureus, and on his hands he can transmit it from cow to cow. It is a tough disease, but we have managed to rid many herds in South Africa with that.
Okay, and then connecting to this question, the student also asked how common it is for a cow to become permanently affected with the Staph aureus, and if she doesn't recover after the initial quarantine period, should she be culled to prevent infection to the rest of the herd on the longer term?
Yeah, aureus is known as a chronic disease, so 60% plus of them can become chronic. This question, you just have to also see in this perspective. We do not look at just the individual cow. Remember, if we are going to sample a herd, say, of 1,000 cows, and we identify in this herd 10 cows with aureus, it is very easy in that herd to say, let's cull the 10 cows. Maybe they're very far pregnant, let's dry them off early, let her calf down, but we don't let her come into the dairy. We leave her outside the dairy and milk her there separately. But if you've got, for instance, a dairy and you have 1,000 cows and 200 of them have got Staph aureus, it's a different way of looking at it. I just want you to think of the perception. It's not the individual animal as self that we're only looking at here. In that case, we have to put that group separately. And then within this group, we will identify the animals that we're sure. That is, as I say, if I palpated that, and if I can feel that fibrosis, especially in more than one quarter, I know there is nothing we can do to cure this animal. What we will do then is these animals we put immediately on the culling list. But you cannot go and cull a cow that is 6 months pregnant. Those animals we would dry off early, just to get them out of the parlor, that they're not a risk. The other ones, as I said, if you've got some of them that's got one individual quarter, we inactivate that. It's not the nicest thing to have a 3-teat cow, but we can maybe still get very good calves out of her and longer life production. The other ones that is this criteria I gave you earlier. Those ones, if you've got a young animal in the front quarter, late lactation, we go for treatment. But in this case, we go for a longer acting treatment. Remember, most of our drugs are not concentration, but time dependent. And in this case, we might treat that animal for 3 or 4 days. Just remember, we did the calculation on costs, so you can't do that in 100 cows. You have to be cost effective within this whole situation. So it is, I can't give you a direct answer, but I hope you follow what I mean. It is within the situation, you manage all the animals there. And the most important in a aureus herd is not those animals that's got aureus. It's the animals that does not have aureus, that our management will be of such a level that we prevent the other animals from getting it. In other words, in the parlor, we try and prevent that cow-to-cow transmission. The person that touched the cow, there's no negotiation, must disinfect with the correct disinfection for the correct time his hands. Teat liners must be disinfected between each cows. No communal cloth. Those things are non-negotiable, not even one time. That should be missed. And that is the way. And then in this herds where we've got a lot of aureus, those are the herds where we use the vaccine very, very effectively. Now, I can maybe just quickly go over the way the vaccine works. The vaccine prevents the Hipra vaccine, the aureus from forming the biofilm. Now, if it cannot form the biofilm because the biofilm prevents the polypomorpholeucocytes from killing the bacteria, the biofilm prevents the antibiotic from getting to the bacteria to kill them. So the immune system of the cow is better in coping with this aureus, especially new infections, and our treatment success is also better. So it's the vaccine just helps us, together with good management, to get rid of aureus out of the herd in a better and faster manner. But it is not a one-day solution. That I can promise you.
Thank you, Prof. Petzer, for that, for answering that. And another one is just out of interest. With everyone having to wear masks due to COVID, has the cases of Staph aureus decreased? And if so, would you recommend us making the milkers wear masks in future?
We had a COVID situation in the 19s, that is now in inverted commas. The humans in the humans that actually infected the animals were mostly people with immune depressing disease. But if you are, for instance, have chronic sinusitis, you can carry it in your upper respiratory tract. We actually had a vet in those days. We examined all the milkers, the manager, all of them were negative. And when we actually tested the vet, which was the owner, he was Staph aureus positive. So to answer your question, if you think back of the data that I presented, we see very, very little of the human Staph aureus. It's just 0.6%. Since there is treatment for the people with HIV/AIDS, the number of cases we have seen in the country came down extensively. So a short answer would be at the moment, no. Because the threat of the human Staph aureus was in the 90s, going up to around about 2000, where we isolated more of the human-associated aureus than the bovine ones. So at the moment, from Staph aureus point of view, no, we didn't see a difference.
Thank you. And then what technique is used to kill off a chronic udder quarter?
There are quite a few available, but I would rather, if the students really want to have them, to email me, that I give them the whole standard operating procedure. This should preferably only be done by a veterinarian. One of the reasons is if you inactivate a quarter, for instance, by using something like ether, and that animal has got an E. coli infection, and you kill off the E. coli, which you will do with the inactivation, you can set the endotoxin free, and you can actually kill the cow. So those students that's interested in that, please just send me an email. We can also, once they come on clinics, I will discuss it with them. But it's the procedure is, it's not so delicate, but I do not want to give it to people that can't use it correctly. So they're welcome to contact me.
Okay, then there's another question referring back to your first presentation. Is there a problem with milk flow if the touch-up to the attachment is very short or quick? Oh,
yeah, there is for sure. Remember, your lay-down reflex in the cow takes minimum 30 seconds. The moment you touch the teat, the impulse is sent to the brain, and then oxytocin needs to go all the way from the brain via the blood to the udder. And that takes a minimum of 30 seconds. The one graph I show where there was a bimodal phase, if there is no lay down, it's only the milk that is at that period in the udder cistern and in the teat cistern, just the milk that's waiting to come out, that comes out, but then there's a delay period. What the lay down reflex actually means is, the best I can example is maybe if you've got a round ball with water in, and round the ball, the ball would represent the alveoli, is the muscle tissue. Now, if there is not a lay down reflex, if you turn the ball around, it's got a little hole, there will be fluid coming out. But if you have the muscle around the ball, like with your hand, and you press it, the flow is much faster, and that is actually what your lay down reflex is. The oxytocin stimulate that muscle that's around the alveoli where the milk is in, to press it, that it comes out very fast. And if you do not wait minimum 30 seconds after stimulation, if you don't stimulate at all, in those farms, I can show you, and it's like that, not just in South Africa, all over the world. A lot of problems with initial milk flow, when especially in machines that's got high lines, that's got a vacuum that can go up 50 kPa and more, there is a lot of teat damage in the beginning. And the problem is, if the cow feels that high vacuum in the beginning, it hurts her. If it hurts her, she excretes adrenaline, and then she overrides the whole lay down reflex. And what will happen? Your animals will take much longer to milk out. The milk flow will be much lower, and your wear and tear and damage and also discomfort to that cow will be much higher. So it's a simple principle that can actually save both on milking time, and it can save the longevity of the cows. In other words, keep them in the parlor not for 1 or 2 lactations only, but maybe up to 6 lactations plus.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Inge-Marie or Prof. Inge-Marie. There is also a question whether it's possible to get an email address for further herd-specific inquiries and questions.
Yes, can I just give it, or will you provide it? It's my name. I will spell it to you. INGE, it's Inge, hyphen, Marie, MARIE, dot Petzer, PETZER, @up.ac.za. And you're welcome to email me.
Thank you, Dr. Petzer. With regards to stimulation for milk let down to prevent teat damage, would massaging during the udder washing assist in reducing this?
There is a bit of assistance, but what they have seen with research is the best stimulation is touching the teat. You know, if I want to learn something, I always also go back to nature. If you see how a calf is suckling on the cow, and that is really, you know, the best stimulation, it is really touching the teats. And they have also shown that much better stimulation is achieved by touching all four than rather just touching one teat. So there might be a little bit, but the best stimulation is really by touching the teats.